In 50 Yards of Fun, just one project has a ring, so rather than having a lengthy how-to for one thing, I thought I would do a video on how to make them instead. These are the same rings as in my second book, Knit a Monster Nursery, so if you had questions on those, hopefully this will answer them. We'll start our ring by using Provisional Cast on. We'll take our working yarn and a needle and make a slip knot in the yarn. And then we'll go ahead and place that slip knot onto the needle. Your tail doesn't need to be too long here, just long enough to weave in at the end. Once the slip knot is on the needle, we'll grab some waste yarn. I like to double my waste yarn up. I don't know why, and you don't need to, but that's how I do it. We'll hold the waste yarn in front of the working yarn, and then we'll go under the waste yarn, grab the working yarn, then over the waste yarn and grab the working yarn. Under, over. You can see we're making loops on both the needle and the waste yarn as we do this. We'll do this until we have as many stitches as the pattern calls for, but we'll only count the stitches on the needle rather than that on the waste yarn. We'll ignore those stitches for now and just work with the stitches on the needle. So continue to cast on until you have the correct number of stitches on your needle. Then, when we get as many stitches as we need, we're going to hold the working yarn under the waste yarn, turn the work around, and begin to knit the first stitch on the needle. Just make sure you hold that working yarn under the waste yarn so you don't lose the loops on your needle. At this point, we'll ignore the stitches on the waste yarn and just simply knit those on the needle. We'll come back to the stitches on the waste yarn later. There's also a crochet chain provisional cast on, which I don't like as much. I always seem to do it wrong, and this one is so easy, I always use this one instead. Once we've knitted all the stitches on the needle, we're going to go ahead and tighten up that slip knot if we need to, and then slide all of the stitches to the center of the cable so that we can divide them and get them set up for magic loop method. We'll find the center of the stitches, pull out the cable, and slide the stitches to each needle tip. Once the stitches are on the needle tips, we'll find the working yarn, and we'll make sure that's coming from the back because we'll be joining to work in the round. To join to work in the round, we'll need to join from the last stitch with the working yarn to the first stitch on the front needle. Again, we're going to ignore the stitches on the waste yarn at this point, pull out the back needle, and begin to work magic loop to work in the round. We'll knit all of these stitches like normal, and we'll keep knitting like this for as far as our pattern calls for. At this point you can see I've knit many rounds with the provisional cast on the bottom, and I'm ready to turn this piece into a ring. You'll knit as much as your pattern calls for, and then when you're ready to knit the ring, you'll want to grab your second needle, which can be any length, just the same size as your first one, and slip all of those provisional cast on stitches onto your needle. You can leave the waste yarn in there at this point, and once all of the stitches are on the needle, you can pull it out. You can see I now have stitches on 2 needles with what were waste yarn stitches on a bottom needle and the stitches connected to my working yarn on the top needle. At this point, we're ready to cut our working yarn, leaving ourselves a tail long enough to Kitchener around all of these stitches. You'll want a tail about 4 times as long as your piece is around, although longer is always better. At this point, you'll want to grab a tapestry needle and slide your working yarn through the tapestry needle so you're ready to use Kitchener stitch. Now it looks like we could be ready to go, but we need to bring these what were waste yarn stitches up through the center to create a ring and bring the two circular needles together so we can work them at the same time. We'll just thread the circular needle tips through the center of the tube that we've made and bring them up next to the other set of circular needles. You can see as we fold the tube in half, this is beginning to look like a ring. To work Kitchener stitch and close these stitches, we're going to work from what is here, the blue needle, to the gold needle. This will be from the working yarn needle to the waste yarn stitches needle. Once we're set up with these first purl and knit stitches, we're going to begin to work Kitchener stitch. We'll go through the first needle as if to knit with our tapestry needle, and then we'll slip it off the needle entirely. Then we'll go through the next stitch on our front needle as if to purl. Then we'll move to the back stitches. We'll go through the first stitch on the needle as if to purl. We'll slip that stitch off the needle, and then we'll go through the first stitch now, the first stitch on the back needle as if to knit. We'll repeat these stitches over and over and over to finish the ring. So I always remember it as knit, slip, purl, purl, slip, knit. We'll go through the first stitch on the front needle as if to knit, slip it off, then purl the next stitch, then move to the back needle, purl the first stitch, slip it off, and then go through as if to knit with the next stitch. This will take a while, so I'm going to continue some and then come back to it to show you what it looks like. You can see at this point about half the ring is done, and I'm going to begin to stuff it. I pull the needle tips out a ways so that I'm working with the cable and it's a little bit more flexible, and then I just add in a small piece of stuffing into the closed area. I'll keep adding stuffing up to the edges that are finished, and then I'll add in more stuffing later as I go. You don't want the fabric to stretch too much because it'll look strange, so you just want to add a little bit of stuffing in. And then continue to work Kitchener stitch all around the ring. At this point, I only have a couple stitches left to close, so I'm going to add my last bit of stuffing, and then I'm going to finish Kitchenering shut the ring. It can be a little bit hard to hold at this point, but it's manageable. So we'll work this last stitch here. And then if you have what I have here and you have an extra stitch on one side and not the other, you can just pick up from the next stitch to make up for it. So I'll just pick up this stitch here and work it as if it was already on the needle. Now that I've finished kitchening, you can see I have a gap. If you have one like this, you can just whip stitch it closed. I'll show you how to do it. Just go through one side and then the other side of the opening and pull it shut. Once I'm done whip stitching closed any gaps left, I'm going to grab the tail that's left from the beginning and thread it through a tapestry needle, and then I'll just push the needle through the ring and pull it so it's coming out the other side, and then trim the end flush with the ring. And that's it. There's rings.